Hey guys, hoping all is well. So in this video we're going to be continuing the read-along of The Secret Zoo Traps and Specters by Brian Chick, and last time we completed chapter 4, so we'll be starting with chapter 5 today. And just as a quick recap from our last chapter, P-Dog was trying to be rescued from his injuries from DeGraff by Ella, and Ella had gotten him into the house but had noticed that her mom was arriving back home in the nighttime hours, so she had to conceal his identity, which she was not able to do so, but Ella's mom mistaken it for a stuffed animal, so she quickly kind of took him away from the scene, and the next morning she put him in her backpack as she headed to school, to which then Mrs. Nowicki, Noah's mom, offered her a ride. And now she is trying to conceal his identity from Noah's mom while they are all headed to school. So we're going to start with chapter 5 today, and as always, if we do see any pictures, I will definitely show them. Chapter 5. P-Dog Gets Schooled. "You're kidding, right?" Richie said as the scouts headed up one of the long, winding paths of the concrete courtyard before their school's front entrance. Clarksville Elementary had a main building with 3 wings. Each wing housed 2 grade levels. 10 years ago, the old school building has been demolished to make room for a larger one, parts of which, the gym, the cafeteria, the media center, were over 2 stories high. "Tell me you're not serious," Richie pleaded. "Tell me P-Dog's not really in your backpack right now." Ella shifted the backpack on her shoulders. "Nope, no joke." Richie touched Ella's backpack, and when something wriggled, he pulled his hand back. "She's not kidding, guys! I just felt P-Dog's head! Or his butt! It was something round anyway, and it was moving!" The friends pushed through the front doors of Clarksville Elementary, leaving behind the rain and the lineup of buses. They moved down one of the wings and stopped at Megan's locker. As Megan spun through her combination, Ella briefed them on the previous night. When she mentioned her confrontation with DeGraff, everyone's mouths dropped open. "DeGraff?" Megan gasped. She peered over both her shoulders to make certain no one could hear them. "In your front yard? DeGraff? I can't believe this." "Well, believe it, sister," Ella said as she shifted her backpack again. "He was knocking on my front door like a Girl Scout with cookies." Ella quickly told them the rest of the story. DeGraff, the prairie dogs, Solana and the zoo guards, P-Dog, and how he'd wound up getting a ride in her backpack. "Not good," Richie said, shaking his head. "And I'm talking in the really major way." Megan shut her door, and they walked the short way to Noah's locker. As Noah hung up his jacket, he said, "Okay, don't freak out. We have cross-training after school. We just need to make it through the day. That shouldn't be too hard, right?" As he banged the steel door shut, the morning bell rang, scattering kids towards their classrooms. The scouts headed to Richie's locker. "What am I supposed to do with P-Dog?" Ella asked. "Put him in my locker?" "Not a good idea," Richie said. "You can hardly breathe in those things." "Trust me, I know." Richie was referring to how Walt, the school bully, would sometimes squeeze him into his locker and shut the door when teachers weren't around. Megan gasped. "He'd suffocate." Richie opened his locker. The inside walls bulged out in the general shape of his body. When trapped in the steely confines, Richie knew how to wriggle into a comfortable position until someone, usually one of the scouts, set him free. Closing his door, Richie said, "Take your backpack with you. Keep it close, under your desk or something." "Are you nuts?" Ella said. "How am I supposed—" But Richie and Noah were already walking away. As the boys turned to their open the classroom door, Noah looked back to Ella and shrugged, saying, "What else are we supposed to do?" "Great," Ella said. She led Megan down the hall, opened her locker, and fed her belongings inside. Everything but her backpack. Then the 2 girls squirmed through the thinning crowd of students and walked into room 112, their split grade class. Mrs. Simmons was rambling on about decimals and place values, scrawling large numbers across the whiteboard and dropping dots at their feet. Ella couldn't have cared less. All she could think about was the backpack beneath her chair. She kept touching it with her feet. each time breathing a sigh of relief. Though she knew Megan was watching the bag from across the room, she couldn't help but fear P-Dog would find a way to manipulate the zipper open and sneak out for a stroll. Trying to think of something other than P-Dog, Ella looked over at a bulletin board beside the word wall. There were announcements about different things. A lost jacket, a lost necklace, the school play tryouts. 2 posters were tacked to it. One promoted a reading campaign called Reading is Your Key, and the other advertised the school Halloween party, a green-faced witch with a hooked nose saying, "Come to Clarksville Elementary's Halloween Bash. You'll have a ghoul time." The Halloween poster reminded Ella of DeGraff again, the way he had stood among the swirl of leaves in her front yard, his body a silhouette against the night, his fingers curled into half-fists, the wind beating his trench coat against his boots. The fright of Halloween had come early to Ella's household, and this year that fright was real. Ella turned away from the bulletin board and watched the second hand of the clock sweep around in its slow, endless circle. Mrs. Simmons changed subjects. History, maybe. Or government. When you were worried about a live zoo animal in your backpack, all the subjects seemed the same. About an hour into the school day, Peter Wilkens approached the front of the room and accidentally hooked his foot in the strap of Ella's backpack, slinging it across the aisle. It came to a stop against the leg of Mackenzie McCarthy's chair, and everyone stared at it for what was something that did not belong. The only sound that became of that was Tana Quinn wetly chomping her gum. Flushed with embarrassment and fear, Ella reached out into the aisle with her foot and snagged back the pack. She tucked it neatly beneath her chair and did her best to ignore Peter's dirty look. When the students broke for recess 2 hours later, Ella took her backpack. Outside, the scouts headed toward the Monster Dome, avoiding the puddles left behind by the morning storm. On the climber's steel bars, a bunch of second graders were hanging upside down, their faces looking like turnips, red and swollen. The scouts gathered in a quiet area behind the action. Noah gestured toward Ella's backpack. "Everything okay so far?" Ella zipped open her bag. P-Dog poked out his snout and gave the playground air a curious sniff, looking no worse for wear. Ella quickly palmed his head and pushed him back inside. "Sorry, P," she said as she sealed the bag. "I just thought of something," Richie said. "What if P-Dog has to go to the bathroom?" When the scouts gave him blank stares, he felt the need to elaborate. "You know, the number 2 type." Ella said, "Then I guess things are going to get a little stinky." For the rest of recess, the scouts listened again to Ella tell her story of the previous night. Despite all they'd been through with the secret zoo, it still seemed unreal. DeGraff in her front yard, Solana and the guards chasing him down the streets. When the bell rang, the 4 friends merged into a crowd of children headed indoors. In the hallways, sounds echoed off the steel lockers and concrete walls. Ella made her way into class and slipped her backpack under her desk once more. She felt the bag shift as P-Dog squirmed into a new position. Once everyone had settled in at their desks, Mrs. Simmons started talking about something. Ella couldn't pay attention. Like a sports team with a narrow lead, she only cared about beating the clock. When the class was dismissed for lunch, Ella jumped from her desk and scooped up the backpack. She followed Megan down the cafeteria line, paid $2 for a slimy concoction involving noodles and clumpy gravy, then took a seat beside Richie and Noah, where she put her bag on the table beside her tray. Then, not a minute later, the worst thing that could have happened. Chapter 6. Wide Walt arrives. "What's up, dorks?" The voice, deep and menacing, had come from Wide Walt, the worst bully in Clarksville Elementary. From being 2 long rows of tables, Walt strutted toward the scouts, his elbows batting the heads of a few seated students. Dave and Doug, his 2 cronies, followed and glared all around, daring anyone to attempt eye contact. "Great," Megan groaned as she steered her attention back to her tray. "Here comes Bonehead." Walt continued toward them, his wide shoulders swaying. When one student was struck by Walt's elbow, his glasses fell off and plopped into his wet pile of noodles. When another student was bumped, his sporks missed his mouth and instead jabbed his ear. Noah glanced around and saw there wasn't a single adult in sight. "The action, dorks," Walt slurred, as if he were talking around a mouth full of pebbles. When he neared the scouts, his gaze fell to Ella's backpack. "What's in the bag?" Noah watched his friends tense up. It was Ella who answered, a bit too quickly and defensively, Noah thought. "Nothing." "Nothing? What kind of an idiot walks around carrying a bag of nothing?" Dave and Doug nodded once, twice, 3 times. Noah thought they looked like little bobbleheads, the kind you stick on the dashboard of a car. "Walt," Ella said, "your head is a bag of nothing, and you still carry it around?" Walt's eyes opened so big that Noah could actually see their roundness. "Talk a walk, White," Ella said. "You're blocking our light, you gargantuan oaf." Walt's back stiffened. He studied the nearby students to calculate how many had witnessed the insult. Then he slowly drew down his eyelids and leaned so close to Ella that she could have puckered up and planted a kiss on his lips. "What did you just say?" Ella locked her stare on his. A 4th grader at the next table gasped. Another student began to whimper. "Okay," Walt said with a sneer. "I'll walk, but not without this." With a clean jerk of his arm, he seized Ella's backpack and slung it over his shoulder. The scouts jumped up. Noah reached across the table, spilling his chocolate milk. Ella swiped at her pack and missed, her fingertips grazing Walt's shirt. "Whoa!" Walt said, his voice quivering with laughter. "What have you got in this thing?" "Give it back, Walt," Megan shouted. "Give it back now." "Or what? What are you twerps going to do?" Ella swiped at her backpack a second time, missing completely. Walt jumped back and allowed his friends to step in front of him like a shield. When Noah again reached across the table, Walt snickered. He juggled his stare between Noah and Ella, saying, "Man, whatever you dorks got in here, it must be good." He fumbled for the zipper. Ella lunged forward, but Walt's cronies held her back. She reached around Doug, her open hands sweeping through the air. "Let go of me," she said, her worms snapping out one at a time. "Get your hands off her," Richie hollered. He reached around Ella and shoved Doug, who didn't budge. Just as Noah was about to yell for help, Walt unzipped the backpack and, without looking, plunged his hand inside. He immediately squealed, dropping the bag to the floor, and stared with wide eyes at several dots of blood on his finger. Ella reached around the legs of Walt's friends and snatched up her pack. She pitched it across the table into the open arms of Noah, who zipped it, then tossed it over to Megan, who was the farthest from Walt. "You freak!" Walt poked his finger into his mouth to suck off the blood, then pulled it back out. "What the heck's in that thing?" Dave and Doug backed away from Ella until they bumped against Walt. "Not telling," Ella said, "but for $50, you can have the antidote." Walt's eyes widened with worry. It was obvious he believed her, at least a little. From across the cafeteria, a voice rang out. "White!" 100 heads turned, and the room fell to silence. Standing at the end of the tables was Mr. Kershen, the toughest teacher in Clarksville Elementary. He marched between the benches and stopped at the scene, his hands propped on his hips. "You guys haven't learned to get along yet?" Walt uncorked his finger from his mouth with a slight popping sound. He shook his bleeding fingertip toward Ella and said, "That freak! She's got something in her bag! Something that... You mind telling me what you were doing with her backpack?" Walt's eyes shifted as he searched for a good lie. I thought she took my library book." Mr. Kershen's face fell in a frown. He hooked his finger inside his shirt collar and pulled it away from his neck. "You got to be kidding me." As he spoke, his mustache rolled like a wounded caterpillar. "White, the last time you checked out a book, it was a movie." "But, Mr. Kershen, I..." "Come on." He grabbed Walt's arm and led him down the aisles between the tables. "To the principal's office." Walt's friends, suddenly unsure about everything, dashed out of sight. The scouts dropped into their seats, and Megan slid the backpack over to Ella. Within seconds, the normal cafeteria activity resumed. Among the chatter of the students, Richie found it safe to talk. "Gargantuan oaf," he said to Ella. "Where in the world did that come from?" Ella shrugged. "I guess stress brings out my vocabulary." Noah turned and watched Mr. Kershen escort Walt from the cafeteria. This was the third time in 2 years that Walt had gotten into trouble after an altercation with the scouts. The thought made Noah very nervous. And I'll stop the video there, ending chapter 6. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video. And in our next video, we'll be continuing the Secret Zoo Traps and Specters with chapter 7. But as always, guys, please take good care of yourselves, especially during this time. And be safe. And thank you so much for watching. And we'll see you very soon. Bye.